Oh, hello, chess friends! Welcome back to Analyzing Our Games, part 27. Yeah, this game is a very nice and interesting one, and I called it Karpovian, my most Karpovian game so far. It's interesting because I've played a very interesting movement of the king to attack my opponent's king. So let's go for the game. My opponent played e4. I played c6, so this is one of the first times I played the Caro-Kann, and I've been playing it frequently, yeah, trying to understand the ideas and get better at it. My opponent, of course, played d4, d5. He took on d5, yeah, that's the exchange variation. Yeah, there are other options like knight c3, then I take on e4, then my opponent takes, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, and we go to very different positions. I think this is called Capablanca variation. Yeah, but my opponent took on d5, so this is the exchange variation. I took with my pawn, bishop d3, so developing his bishop, knight f6, developing my knight, and here my opponent played knight e2. Yeah, this is, of course, an equal position. The idea here is to avoid the pinning of the knight, because if my opponent played the knight to f3, then my bishop would go to g4 and I would pin his knight. Yeah, so that's the idea to play knight e2. Another option here is to play c3 because it's gonna be the protection of the d5 d4 pawn, so c3 is very common. Then there's the idea of knight c3, c6, and the game goes on. So after my opponent played knight e2, I pinned my opponent's knight. I played bishop g4. Yeah, castles e6. Yeah, now that my bishop is out of the position here, yeah, the initial position, now I can play e6. Bishop g5, my opponent's also developing his bishop. Another option is bishop f4, it's a very good move. Okay, after bishop g5, I played bishop e7. So it's to develop and unpin my queen. But maybe it's a little bit better to play bishop d6. Yeah. So after bishop e7, my opponent played with his other knight, knight d2. Yeah, see, he knows how to play this position because he didn't play the knight to c3. So he intended to play c3 in the future. Yeah, it's also possible to play this at this moment. So after knight d2, I played knight c6, yeah, developing my knight and also threatening to take on on d4 because of this pin. My opponent defended the pawn, good. Yeah, it's also possible to play f3, then bishop h5, knight f4, bishop g6, and c3. Yeah, or even take on g6, but then I I open my H file and sometimes it's good. Okay, c3. Then I castled. Yeah, so it's time to put my king into safety. f3. See the plan I told you before. Bishop h5. Yeah, maybe it's possible to play bishop f5, but then I'm gonna my opponent's gonna take on f4 at f5, and then I would get a double pawn here, and this pawn would be isolated, so I don't think it's a good idea. Then bishop h5, then my opponent played here knight g3. It's better to play knight f4 with the idea of exchanging the the knight for the bishop and getting the pair of bishops. Yeah. Now my opponent has two bishops. I have just one, but it doesn't change much. Yeah. I don't think it's so radical to say that white is better here. Maybe the position is equal. I have my counter chances too with both knights. So knight g3, bishop g6, queen c2. Yeah, my opponent was thinking about attacking my king, but yeah, it's not that dangerous. The queen c2. There are other options here like knight b3, bishop b1 is also possible. It's also possible to take on g6, and then I would retake with my h pawn. The position is equal or black's a little bit better, but nothing much. Then here I played rook c8. So the threat here is to play my knight to b4 and attack my opponent's queen, and he can't take with the pawn because the rook would take the queen. So this is a threat. My opponent saw this, and then he took on g6. I took with the pawn, and I'm still threatening to take his pawn on d4, because if I take here, he can't take with the pawn because his queen, he would lose his queen. So he played queen d3 to defend the pawn. Okay, another idea here is to go back with the bishop and defend the pawn, but yeah, that's okay. Nothing much, nothing different here. Okay, then when my opponent played queen d3, I played queen b6, yeah, to attack the pawn on b2 and also to connect the rooks. My opponent defended the pawn, of course, yeah. It's also, there are some things here, it's like um, um, a trap here, yeah. If my opponent played a3, I couldn't take on b2 because yeah, then my opponent would play rook f b1 and my queen is lost. So I would have to defend uh, this square here or play something different, but not take on b2. Please don't do that. Okay, so rook a b1, a5. So the idea of a5 is to avoid the rupture here, yeah. So I wanted to keep my opponent's pawns not developed here. I wanted to stop my opponent's play on the queen side. Okay, then my opponent played king h1. Yeah, that's a safe play, safe move, because as you can see, my queen is on the same diagonal, so it's a safe move. Maybe it's a little bit better to play knight e2, yeah, to try to do some movements with the knight to the other side or do something different. But yeah, I don't think king h1 is bad. Rook f e1. So my idea was to play sooner or later e5, but yeah, that's not easy. While when I play e5, my d5 pawn becomes weak. So we have to think when it's okay to play this, because yeah, now I would get an isolated pawn, and maybe in the future it can become weak. This knight can come to b3 and then to d4, and yeah, I would avoid this. So I had to prepare it. So rook f rook f e8, okay, then rook f e1. This is good. So I played bishop d6, yeah, not afraid of my opponent taking on f6, because I would retake with the pawn, and that's okay. Nothing bad here. Then my opponent played knight df1. He was trying to maybe put this knight to d3, e3, and maybe g4, yeah, to try to exchange my knight. I don't know what his idea was. And then I played queen c7. Yeah, maybe it's even possible here to play this idea here. Yeah, and yeah, I don't think this would be okay now. Yeah, king h7, because of this pin. As you can see, my king is pinned. Yeah, this pawn is pinned, so my opponent could take on f6, and after g takes f6, then this, and this is bad. This is bad. I don't think this is good. Maybe it's not that good, not that bad. I can take here. Yeah, okay, but I didn't play it. So after I played queen c7, my opponent played this queen b5. Yeah, this is good in a way because it's threatening this pawn, but I don't know. Maybe it's better to close the queen side, or yeah, or maybe even relocate this knight because it's doing nothing there. Okay, but my opponent played here queen b5, and now I decide to take to move my king. So king h7, and here my opponent played this, maybe trying to put more double the rooks on the e file. Okay, I move the rook to h8. Yeah, the idea is to pass the rook to the other side. It's like to uncastle. Yeah. Um, Here the computer suggests knight a7 to remove the queen from b5. Then in case of queen d3, then b5. But I don't think it's good, because if the queen is on b5, leave it here, yeah, no problem. So maybe the queen here, she can help the defense of the king, so leave it here, no problem. So I played rook 8, h8, rook b e1, as I told you. My opponent wanted to double the rooks, and then king g8. Okay, so now as you can see, my opponent's king is faced with this rook. Then, of course, he played well. He played king g1 because there were some threats here. For example, when his king was here, I could take this pawn. Yeah, and if my opponent took with the knight, I could take with the queen, because he can't take my queen on g3 because of this pin. So my opponent played king g1. Good. Now I wanted to remove my opponent's defenders. Yeah, so that's why I played knight h5. King f2 is a mistake. I think it's better to take on h5, and then after take on h5, h4, and it consolidates. It kind of blocks the position, yeah. So this is a little bit better than move the king. Okay, then after king f2, I played knight f4. Yeah, threatening to take the rook. Initially I was thinking about a double here, the king, but this queen was still here. Then I would have to remove the king, the queen, by playing knight a7. Then it would be, I would win the exchange here, check on d3. Then my opponent played this, yeah, to avoid this maneuver here. But now I played this. Oh, instead of playing rook e3, my opponent should have taken the bishop. So eliminate the attackers. Yeah. Now here, black's a little bit better, but nothing much. Yeah. But no, my opponent played rook e3. I removed the queen from this threatening place here. My opponent went to b3. I played b5. Yeah. Trying to gain some space here and avoid some things. And then my opponent took on f4. But now it's a little bit better to play rook b1. And there are some movements here. Yeah, black's a little bit better, but nothing so special about it. Yeah, but after taking f4, I took with the bishop, of course. And then my opponent played here because the rook was attacked. And now came the good move. Yeah, then I found this interesting sacrifice here. And I spent just 33 minutes because I was already, this idea was already mined. Okay, here it's better to move the rook, but my opponent took on h2. So this is not good because of this check. And after this, I think it's better to play king f1. Then I would take the rook, and yeah, the white's position here is horrible, yeah? Despite the fact that the number of materials is reduced, but I can still find some ways here to win the game. But yeah, then my opponent played king g1. I took with check. Yeah, he went back. Maybe king h1 is even worse. Then I played here. Take a look at this, the power of this bishop. Yeah, it blocks everything, and now my rook, my queen can infiltrate, and things are gonna be bad for white. So after rook d1, I played queen f4, yeah, with the idea of queen h4 and mate here on h1. Then I think, I don't know why, but the computer suggests a4. Okay. Queen c2. He went back to defend. Now, queen h4, so threatening mate here. My opponent moved the rook. Yeah, that's okay. But I think it's a little bit better to play rook ed2. So after rook e3, I played queen h1 check. Queen e2 is the only move. Queen takes on g2. Rook takes. Yeah, now my opponent's threatening to take my rook, my queen, or to exchange. So it's not a good idea. When you are attacking, keep attacking. Don't exchange anything. So that's why I played queen h3. So queen e2. I thought this was a mistake, but there are no good ways here to defend this position. Then queen f5 check. King d2. Yeah, there's no other way. And now I can use my bishop again, the powerful bishop, to pin the knight, the king and the rook. Okay, and my knight's still here. It's not taking part in the fight. Rook h1. This is something about this open column here, so I have to be careful, but I can get first. So I played b4, so the idea was to open up the c file. Yes. After queen g2, so my opponent wanted to play queen h3 to propose the exchange of queens, or mate here. Yeah, so this is very dangerous. But as I told you, I got first. I checked on c3. My opponent took here. I checked the bishop. Now it's the time to exchange the bishop for the rook. Then my opponent took, yeah, no other way. I checked on c3 with the rook, king, and now you can see two powerful pieces are attacking my opponent's king, and there's nothing here to defend. So in these situations, it's usually checkmate. So I played queen c2. Yeah, I don't know about the time. I think it was short on time, but there's a better move here. It's queen d3 check. Then, in case of king e1, there's king e3 check. If in case of this, there's rook c1 checkmate. And in case of rook queen e2, then the same, rook c1 is checkmate. But I played here. I would win the queen. So my opponent played this, king e1. I took on g2. My opponent played this, and I checkmate on c1 anyway. So I hope you like this game. It was interesting. There are some uh, tactical ideas at the end, but I think the most important ones were the strategic ones. Yeah, the idea of passing the king to h7 and then the rook to h1 and doing this inversion. It's like uncastling, and there are some situations, and especially in calm openings and defenses like the Caro-Kann, it's possible to do this. Okay, thank you very much. Take care and see you next time.